Good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. Part of the real joy of heading the Graduate School of Political Management is that you get to welcome some great giants that have engaged society to do marvelous things, and we're pleased to have you to join us with a few of those giants. I'm Mark Kennedy, the Director of the Graduate School of Political Management. I'd like to say today we're very honored to have the Prime Minister, or as they say in Gaelic, I'm not sure I quite get the pronunciation right, Taoiseach of Ireland here. And he's going to be doing the Paul O'Dwyer Lecture. This lecture was established by his son, Brian O'Dwyer, who will introduce the Taoiseach in just a second. Let me pay special tribute to Michael Collins and the Embassy, all your staff, for your great partnership with this. It's also wonderful to have Fanula, the Prime Minister's wife, with us. So let's give her a round of welcome. Thank you. You know, I never lived in a town of more than 500 till I graduated from college, so I understand that oftentimes great things can come from small towns, and that's certainly the case with our leaders here today. The O'Dwyers immigrated from a town called Bohola in County Mayo, which I think is even smaller than the town that I come from, which is saying something. But they made the big time in the Big Apple in New York. Paul O'Dwyer really made his mark. I am reminded of this story of William Butler Yeats, who observed that education is not just filling up a pail, but it's lighting a fire. And Paul O'Dwyer in New York really lit a fire. He was the lawyer that represented the underdog, whether you were talking somebody that was trying to get their union rights, whether it was an African American looking for their civil rights, whether it was an Irish fighter trying to fight for Irish independence and freedom, whether it was somebody accused of communist activities, whether it was somebody fighting for a Jewish state. Paul O'Dwyer fought for them all and did a wonderful job. In public service, he was originally elected to represent Manhattan at large in the city council, and his great, excellent efforts on behalf of his citizens earned him to be nominated to be a U.S. Senate candidate, facing the formidable Jacob Javits. He returned to the city council as president of the city council, the New York City Council, for 3 years, and is revered for the service that he provided to his city, to his constituents. Brian O'Dwyer picked up right where that left off and has leading his father's firm, over a century-long firm now, O'Dwyer and Bernstein, and he is also noted for helping out immigrants, Irish or otherwise. He has the distinction of being recognized for that work on behalf of immigrants by both the governors of New York and Puerto Rico. He's been the honorary marshal of parades for both the St. Patrick's Day Parade as well as the Puerto Rican Parade. He has received honors from Ellis Island as well as his college fraternity, and been listed as one of 25 people by the Irish Voice magazine as the most impactful Ireland. The Dwyer family and the Taoiseach both come from County Donegal. Actually, County Donegal, I'm going to get in trouble for that. County Mayo, I come from County Donegal.
You almost lost it there, Mark.
Almost lost it. I could be in big trouble. You know, they say Donegal, when the good Lord got to Donegal, he ran out of good soil and all he had left was scenery. But they say, it was interesting because I did some search as to what they say about County Mayo. I've been to County Mayo, but what they brag about on their brochure is that it is known for its wilderness in abundance, and that it is empty, that its emptiness is indeed quite special. But out of that wilderness, out of that emptiness, has come two great families. We're pleased to have both of those families represented with us here today, the O'Dwyer and the Kenny family. Please welcome Brian O'Dwyer to recognize his colleague from Mayo County.
I noticed that Mark was extolling the County Mayo in the brochure. You will notice that they did not brag about the weather that was that happens. And in fact, my father came from the small town of Bahola. And those of you who are Irish know of Bahola because we're world famous. We have, in the town, we have 3 pubs and 1 church. And we all thought that that was about the right proportion in one's life. Today I have it's a particular honor for me to be here. I was honored to have graduated from George Washington University and having had a wonderful education as an undergraduate. I tell the story of being at George Washington during the Civil Rights Movement and being involved in the Civil Rights Movement with my father. There came a time in Selma when the Sheriff Connor's people were beating the marchers, and we were petitioning Lyndon Johnson to send the troops in to protect the black people in that area. And my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife, and I were picketing the White House, as was the wont of George Washington students, asking that we give help and aid to the African Americans that were living in Alabama. And I remember one night, it was late at night, and I looked at inside the White House, and the lights were on, and being a typical braggadocio 18-year-old, I said to that young lady, I said, "Stick with me, lady. I'll have you in the White House one day." And fast forward to many years later, Bill Clinton is the White House, and we were thrilled to be at the state dinner, invited to the state dinner for President Robinson. And as we walked into the White House, I turned around to her in my best tuxedo, and she in her best dressed. I looked at her and I said, "I told you so, didn't I?" And being my wife, she said, "It took you long enough, didn't it?" But that was the tradition of, that was being at George Washington University. Since then, we've been involved in many, many civil and historic rights for the people of New York, the immigrants. And in my father's best tradition, the Irish community in New York has been involved not only in protecting their own and helping their own, but in helping many, many other groups. In our Irish Immigrant Center that I chair, the door is never closed to anyone, and that's in the finest tradition of the Irish. And today, after Hurricane Sandy, the Taoiseach was in Brooklyn, down at Breezy Point, which many of you know is an Irish enclave in Brooklyn. But that's not the story. The story was Greg Meeks, the African-American congressman from Rockaway, not too far away, came to personally thank the Taoiseach for the work of the Irish people and the Irish government in helping and restoring those areas, those African-American areas in the Rockaways. It is a tradition of service to the world that is part of the ethos of the Irish people. And it's the ethos of the Irish people that my father brought from Bahola and came to the United States and had a distinguished career in protecting and promoting the rights of those who were unfortunate. The same can be said for Enda Kenny. Coming from a small town in Mayo, he has portrayed the best of our people. It is no secret that Ireland is going through a terrible economic crisis, an economic crisis that goes totally through the island, the whole population. But despite that, Enda Kenny and his government have reached out to the poor and the dispossessed and made sure that they were not disproportionately hurt by this crisis. And indeed, even today, they have reached out to the immigrants throughout the United States and indeed the world to provide aid and comfort to those Irish living abroad. In the worst economic crisis that this government or any government has ever faced, there is still time and indeed resources to promote, to help the poor and the dispossessed. And that is a tribute to this man and the work that he has done. You know, in Ireland, we say the worst thing you can say about someone is that he forgot where he came from. No one has ever said that to Enda Kenny. He has never forgotten where he's come from. Nor did my father. And my sister Eileen and my cousin Anya are here today with me, and they can tell you the stories that of growing up with a man who never forgot where he came from. But today, in that tradition, we hear from a man who never forgot where he came from. I'm happy to present our Taoiseach, Enda Kenny.
Mark, Brian, Ambassador Collins, Deputy Breen, ladies and gentlemen, I was told I was coming to a university that everybody understands all the languages of the world. So, I'm going to speak for 2 hours in Irish, so put on your headphones. May I wish you all a happy St. Patrick's Week. It's a real privilege for Fionnuala and I to be here in Washington and to have the opportunity to give the lecture in respect of Paul O'Dwyer and what he stood for and how important and yet fragile that flower is. As I say, I'm particularly pleased to be able to speak of a great Irishman and a great Mayo-man, Paul O'Dwyer, described on many occasions as a New Yorker who was a liberal battler for the underdogs and outsiders. He never forgot where he came from and proved it on so many occasions. I had to say a few words to you on the issue and the cause of something that is so close to all our hearts and to the hearts of people around the world, which is our democracy. Therefore, I'm personally honoured that the George Washington University should bestow upon me their Making Democracy Work Award, and I really do appreciate that. Brian, was it not George Washington who said, perseverance and spirit have done wonders in all ages? Here in the United States and in Ireland, we have the privilege, and indeed, on too many occasions, too many people take our democracy for granted. And it is precisely because we do have democracy that makes our duty to all those countries and all those peoples struggling to achieve and to assert their democratic rights, make them all the more urgent and indeed all the more sacred as they struggle to achieve and to assert their democratic rights in many different locations around the world. Democracy was integral and central to all that Paul O'Dwyer believed in. He was the youngest of 11 O'Dwyers from Bohola, the youngest of 11, just a short distance from where I live myself outside Castlebar. Many of his antecedents and many of his counterparts, many of his peers, made their way and their lives in the United States. And I can personally testify that Paul O'Dwyer, in the Mayo phrase, gave so many people the start. When you went to a new place, a new country, a new land, it was very important to get the start. And whether the start was in the docks or in the corporation or in the streets of New York or wherever, Paul O'Dwyer and his office gave so many that start, that step up, that platform. He was passionate about justice, about fairness, about compassion, and about human rights. He was passionate too in his professional and his personal pursuit in defence of each of them. And because he was, and because he did, he made a truly magnificent contribution to public affairs here in the United States and to the legal system in America. And that's why I'm very pleased, Brian, to be in your company, and with Mariana and Eileen, who is also here. And I might say that in your professional career, that you have epitomised the characteristics of your dad in so many ways, in speaking out and in standing up for the underprivileged, for those who are isolated, and for the cause of freedom and liberty and justice. And you have proven to be an equally great friend of our country and a wonderful advocate for our country's cause here in the United States. So as a proud Irishman, and as a proud European, and as Taoiseach, and you got it right, Mark, Taoiseach, which in the Gaelic phrase is chief or leader, though we just refer to it as plain Taoiseach, of a still young republic, of a democracy, and all that implies drives everything that I have to do. The mandate of democracy given at leadership level comes seldom in the lifetime of people, and when it comes, it has to be grasped with both hands in their interests and in the country's interests. Because I understand from so many years in politics that the democratic system gives a politician the most powerful weapon that they possess, which is the vote and their vote. And that's almost, in many ways, an almost sacred exchange of trust and of hope and of confidence with vast transformative powers. Today in Ireland, the government I lead comprised of two parties, the Fine Gael Party and the Labour Party, with different views on a number of issues. You have to use those powers in a way, in implementing a programme to transform our economy, our public service, and the structures of the political system itself. Today, in Europe, we have to take those powers and evangelise them and re-evangelise them as to the very why of the European Union. That's why I know in the last 2 years around the table of Europe, with 26 other leaders representing 500 million people, that truth and trust are absolutely essential to progress being achieved in democratic societies. So we have to use that democratic energy, that democratic zeal, to restore citizens' trust and confidence, not only in national parliaments, but in the political and the social ideals of our union that stretches now from the Atlantic to the Urals. You see, right now across the European Union, many people are really hurting. And they're looking to, and they are asking their political leaders and their politicians for help and for assistance. And in any economic crisis, the deepest wound and the deepest hurt is the scar of unemployment. Facing another day with no hope, with no work to go to, particularly for young people where confidence is easily corroded and where more damaging hope is eroded. That's a recipe for disintegration. No European leader can be happy with a situation where 26 million people are registered as unemployed. That is a completely unsatisfactory position and can only and will only be dealt with by democracy and political leaders and governments working in the interests of the peoples of our countries in an understanding way that we're neither isolated nor independent anymore, rather are we interdependent and interconnected. And we cannot and we must not accept the damage inflicted on young minds with such potential of the situation of unemployment. And we cannot and must not allow them to be haunted by that for the duration of their lives. As I said to the European Parliament in January, as Democrats, we cannot allow a generation to grow up believing that democracy itself has failed them and given them a reasonable chance to make their way and contribute to our common humanity. And that's why in Ireland's presidency in the European Union, we move with all speed to implement the urgent agenda that we have set ourselves as presidency of the Union on stability and on growth and on jobs. For those of you who will understand that the presidency of the European Union rotates between each country, and you hold that presidency for a 6-month period. And in each of those presidencies, a number of serious issues are there to be dealt with. Sometimes they're not dealt with and they roll over to the next one. That's why the agenda for Ireland is exceptional in the sense that we have run through all governments previously effective presidencies in the interests of the Union, and we hope to do the same by the end of June this year. So we extend that goodwill not just to the peoples of the European Union, but to the world, and particularly to our great friends in so many ways here in the United States. The fact of the matter is that the European Union and the United States enjoy the most integrated economic relationship on the planet. We have the most developed set of economies in Western Europe that exist. And the relationship across the Atlantic constitutes nearly 1/3 of world trade flows. That's why European investment in the US is around 8 times that of the EU investment in India and China put together. And this base is of enormous significance. And today, US investment in the EU is 3 times higher than in all of Asia. So it speaks for itself, the potential that exists there. And that transatlantic relationship defines the shape of the global economy as well. So either the EU or the US is the largest trade and investment partner for almost all other countries in the global economy. That speaks of the centrality and the power and the potential of what's there. And that's why we've been very happy from a European and from an Irish perspective to see that the high-level report produced between EU and the US in terms of potential has received a very positive response. I spoke to the President after his re-election. He addressed this matter in his State of the Union address, and last week the European Council gave a very positive endorsement to giving this presidency the mandate to trigger those negotiations, which hopefully can take place after our presidency ends, because there's a 90-day process to be gone through from the US administration point of view. Now, that trade relationship has enormous potential. Currently, 15 million jobs depend upon EU-US trade. Think of the potential for all those millions of people on either side of the Atlantic in terms of the expansion of economies, the potential for job creation and lives to be lived if this were to become a reality, which I fully expect that it will. So long-term evidence will show that the flow of trade and investment helps spread new ideas, new innovation, new technologies, the best research, leading to improvements in products and services. And as we look at the global situation, with a population globally rising at an enormous rate, with people tending and will be able to live longer because of advances in medicine, the fact of the matter is that we are more interdependent and more interconnected than ever before. And that's why, as part of this presidency, working with this presidency in the US, we hope to achieve that mandate for those discussions and negotiations to start. Our national agenda in Ireland, as a small country in comparison to the power and scale of the United States, is equally urgent. When the government I lead was elected, we had lost 250,000 jobs in the 3 years prior to that decision in the private sector. Banks were hemorrhaging money. Our name, our credibility, our integrity had lost stock. A great deal of confusion existed about the direction that Ireland was heading in, and therefore investment and opportunity was limited. In February 2011, the people voted and gave my government a resounding mandate to make difficult decisions, to sort out our problems, to fix our public finances, to restructure the way business was done in Ireland, to work with our colleagues in Europe, and essentially to put our people back to work. And because of their sacrifice, and because of their belief, and because of their understanding of the necessity to make difficult decisions, and because there's a clear and strategic plan in place, we've made a very credible start on rectifying what has been an unprecedented economic situation in Ireland. So after years of chronic contraction, that economy is now beginning to show promising signs of expansion and a return of some degree of confidence. In fact, it's now entering its third consecutive year of growth. Competitiveness and exports have increased. Competitiveness, in that context, our prices are back to 2003 levels. Exports are more successful than even at the height of the so-called boom years. International confidence in our country has been restored. When you talk to political leaders or business people or economists or investors, they look at Ireland in an entirely different light than they did just a short time ago. During the latter half of 2012, the numbers at work in our economy actually rose over a 6-month period for the first time since 2008. Now, clearly, immigration is a factor in there, but also the extent of research, innovation, and clarity of and decisiveness from a government perspective that has opened new doors and new opportunity. That's been a difficult road for the Irish people, difficult road for politicians to have to make decisions like that, but very necessary given the mandate through the democratic vote, be given a job to have the courage and the confidence to actually see where the higher ground is up ahead. So obviously tackling into domestic debt levels was part of that. We've set out a very clear strategy here to deal with it. Trade unions at the moment are considering their view on a new pay deal between management and trades unions in the interests of increasing productivity and helping get our debt levels down to targets that have been set to have our deficit reduced to 3% by 2015 because of the fact that we're in a programme of assistance from the EU and the IMF. We're now actually ranked #1 in the world for the availability of skilled labour. Economic recovery in itself is never an end in itself. It's in keeping with the democratic ideals. It's what recovery can actually do for the people in terms of its social impact, of the contribution they can make to their localities and to their country, political, cultural, social and economic, that interests me. And that recovery and all its potential, if you like, has come following a very hard-won peace in our island. We have some experience of this and have been able to contribute validly to many contributions around the world. In fact, President Clinton, when speaking in Dublin, made the point that since the United Nations was founded, Ireland is actually the one country, small though it is, that can validly point to the fact that we've had personnel or peacekeepers in some location around the world on peacekeeping missions or humanitarian missions since the UN was actually founded. But you're well aware of the troubles in Ireland over a 30-year period and how painful that was and how it affected life on our island brutally, tragically, and involved an enormous scale of response from so many people. The graffiti of murder and hatred and loss was certainly written large over our tiny island. And democracy and the pursuit of democratic ideals were an integral part of winning that peace. And the United States and America played its part in that. The Atlantic might well have divided us, but the links for so many centuries were so strong that America, in its unquenchable thirst and pursuit of democracy, united us in so many ways. I recall being in this city in 1995, 96, I think it was, when the Clinton administration called meetings between the representatives of Ireland and the United States from a business and political point of view. I remember Senator George Mitchell speaking about democracy. I remember him recalling his own family's involvement because of emigration from Ireland, because of economic circumstances, that this country gave him the democratic opportunity to serve as Senate leader for 20 years. He was followed at that meeting by Ron Brown, unfortunately and tragically lost his life in Bosnia in a plane crash sometime later. And he said about democracy that George Mitchell, he said, pointed out that he came here, as ancestors came to this country, because of economic reasons. He spoke of democracy in these terms. He said his ancestors came to America not because of economic circumstances, but because they were in chains. And at the same time, democracy gave him the chance to participate in American life and serve at the highest levels of the administration. It was also evident, though, in the work of President Clinton, who refused to give up and who often referred to the Yeats lines from Innisfree, that peace comes dropping slow. And it was also evident in the support given to Ireland in so many ways by so many people in the Senate and on Capitol Hill, on both sides of the aisle indeed, on Capitol Hill in those Capitol buildings. And that peace, therefore, is as much yours as it is ours because of the involvement of all in the United States. And we know that America will work to sustain that with ourselves and renew it. We're very pleased that President Obama and his administration have been so open, so available, and so encouraging. And that peace caters to and for people with different traditions, different cultures, and different aspirations. The central theme being that there is more that unites us than what divides us. And it's the responsibility of those of us who have the privilege of holding political office to defend, to underpin, to reinforce its principles, its values, and its institutions, and to show real leadership where real leadership is demanded. And our approach to dialogue on the island of Ireland is characterized by openness and by respect, by the wish to harness and nurture relationships with those within troubled communities who have the will and the ability to work to resolve issues peacefully, using politics to succeed where violence never can. That's why in the drafting of the budget for the European Union from 2014 to 2020, called the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, we were able to get included in there a sum of €150 million for expenditure on peace projects on divided lines in communities, fragile communities, in areas in Northern Ireland where young men in particular would be led the wrong way with the wrong result. So positive engagement can build a virtuous cycle of respectful and honest conversations, which gives communities an opportunity to see that democratic politics actually does work, that it gives leaders the impetus to carry on when it seems, as sometimes do, that the fear and the anger and the concern are too big, too intractable to be overcome. It requires belief and conviction and courage to actually see these things through to the end. They can be overcome, they have been overcome, and difficulties will be overcome again in the future. Because we as the Irish government are co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement along with the British government, and we're only too keenly aware of our responsibilities in that regard. In fact, I had a very good conversation with the British Prime Minister David Cameron just last week in Downing Street, indeed in the same room where the British cabinet sits, which was where the Treaty of Ireland was negotiated by Michael Collins and his people at the beginning of the last century. We want to see peace and prosperity flourish. We want to reject the attempts of any tiny minority whose offering is only a return to the emptiness of terror, of bloodshed, and of murder. We don't want any part of that. that peace in Northern Ireland, it meant change for people, for communities, for families. It meant having the courage, as our former president quoted the poet, to come to the edge. So in Ireland itself, in the Republic, we're undertaking major changes in the way we reform public services and indeed of the political system itself. In a letter discovered just a few years ago, George Washington wrote, "The happiness of this country depends much on the Constitutional Convention which is now sitting. It, however, can only lay the foundation. The community must raise the edifice." He was perfectly right. Indeed, it is in the community, in the people, that true democratic power lies. I felt that yesterday in Breezy Point. Here was a community devastated by Sandy. Here was a community that had devastation inflicted upon it because of a natural phenomenon. But here was a community that, in the context of the old Irish word, the mehel, which is a community gathering around itself to achieve common objectives where people have suffered, that true spirit is evident in that particular area, evident to me yesterday. Because while governments may rule, and governments come and governments go, it is the people themselves who obviously govern. With that in mind, the Irish government set up a constitutional convention earlier this year. It will consider a range of matters, both social and institutional. Our programme for government recognises the need for the Constitution to reflect a new and an emerging Ireland and the lives of its people. Conventions made up of 100 people, 33 politicians, 66 members of the public, chosen through a proper democratic system and selected randomly from the electoral register to help make it representative of a broad society in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of regional balance and so on. And that convention's sitting and setting out on a programme of its work. In a time when the gap is growing between people and politics, this is a new opportunity for citizens to become involved in what is an important innovation in our shared public life. So through our constitutional convention, in the same way as Washington wrote so many years ago, Irish citizens and politicians from north and south are coming together to discuss constitutional reform, new concept in a new way in our country. And the Constitution and the Convention has made a number of recommendations to date. Equally, as government, we plan to undertake a major reform of the political system itself, both in terms of our Parliament, the Dáil, our Senate, and our local government, where we see time for real change. Because if you ask people in their homes and in their business and communities across the country to make big changes or to make big sacrifices, then it's got to be obvious and important that the political process itself take a dose of their own medicine, as the case might be. In November last, the Irish people went to the polls and made democratic history. You know of my 3 political ambitions. The first is that by 2016, we make our country the best in the world in which to do business. Secondly, best country in which to raise a family. And thirdly, best country in which to grow old with a sense of dignity and respect. You're also aware of the difficulties and the exceptional hardship and the devastation wreaked on families because of child sexual abuse, and the fact that children in Ireland, in many cases, over a long number of years, did not have the facilities that should have been made available to them. And so, at the stroke of a pen, last November, the Irish people voted through their democratic right to put into our Constitution recognising children in their own right as being part of our society. And that follows on the appointment of the first senior Minister for Children in the history of our state, showing the importance and the priority attached to that by government. Now, that's just part of the range of activities that we are involved in respecting the rights and dignity of the children of Ireland. So I hope that the reforms that we are undertaking as government in terms of democracy will strengthen that, make it more accountable, more transformative, and more open. In his oath as the first President of the United States, George Washington spoke of the importance of precedent, and that in turn, he said, these precedents may be fixed on true principles. That was absolutely true. As I said, truth and trust are two of those principles that are important in a democracy. It was Martin Luther King who said in respect of political responsibility, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? Expediency asks the question, is it political? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And I suppose for everybody, particularly in politics, there comes a time when you have to make decisions and take a position that is neither safe nor popular nor political, but because it's right. They're the very same principles that, like in America, the Republic of Ireland, we strive to live and to work and to thrive according to the highest democratic principles. Paul O'Dwyer, the man from Bohola, has said, fierce-browed and a fighter for people's conscience, described as a guerrilla fighter for a Jewish home state to the rebels of his beloved Ireland, a fighter across the spectrum. He was an eloquent battler in the name of conscience. And he said, you know, ideals should always come first. This is true. Democracy is a fragile flower that, when nurtured, gives immense strength. I was struck by this yesterday in the explanations being given about the Freedom Tower and the site where both trade towers stood. And in front of those reflecting pools of where the site was, there's a pear tree. One tree that was discovered still alive, as it were, in the rubble of the collapse of the trade towers. And that tree was brought to Van Cortlandt Park and nourished and treated, and it's now flourishing again in the location where it was originally growing. A tree that will bloom and blossom before any of the others in that particular patch. A symbol of what democracy can be when it's treated and nourished to allow it to flourish. So for Paul O'Dwyer from Bohola, County Mayo, she said the ideals should always come first. For me, a more important line from Paul O'Dwyer, your dad, Brian, was when he said, politics is the only machinery around on which you can really straighten things out. That's what we're about here, in Ireland, in the United States, and around the world. Or as they would say in Bohola, sort it out and straighten it out. So I'm very happy to give these few words about a man that I admired, that I met on a number of occasions, and my abiding memory of Paul O'Dwyer was when he came home to County Mayo and the local authority honoured him with a civic reception. And there he sat in the chairman's big leather chair with a wild white mane of hair, with his eyes, you know, like beacons of democracy, saying we should exorcise the ghosts of the past because we hadn't won the All-Ireland final for so many years. At the same time, he lashed out at everybody in that local authority area and said, these are the things that you should do. And as you say, Brian, he never forgot his roots, and it's my privilege to follow in his footsteps in that regard. Thank you very much indeed.
So thanks again for those remarks. They were very insightful and certainly honoring Paul, and we appreciate that. Now we come to the point of the event where we are going to present our first Making Democracy Work Award. And in order to present that, I'm going to call forth two friends of Graduate School of Political Management, Frank Fahrenkopf and Kathy Manat, representing Chuck Manat, former members of our board, and Frank is a current member of our board. Chuck and Frank were both chairs of the Republican and Democrat National Committee. Despite opposites, they still figured out how to work together to get important things done. They had a joint passion for advancing democracy, and really were two of the founders of our National Endowment for Democracy that has spread democracy around the world. So as they present you the award, I'm going to read you the citation that goes with it. Democracy has proven itself to be an optimum decision-making approach for a society to secure peace, prosperity, and justice for its own citizens, while upholding and defending a just global order. Despite its acknowledged benefits, democracy too often falls prey to divisive gridlock, efforts to make it less representative for all its citizens, movements to seek its demise. As the first and foremost school of applied politics for strategic communications, the Graduate School of Political Management of George Washington University seeks to recognize world leaders that exhibit distinguished service to mankind by making democracy work. The honorees seek to unite rather than to divide, take bold steps to ensure political institutions are responsive to the interests of citizens, and help democratic institutions withstand threats of subversion from autocratic or anarchical forces. The Graduate School of Political Management wishes to recognize Taoiseach Enda Kenny, TD, for the collaborative manner in which he is leading Ireland in a pathway from financial crisis to sustainable economic development, restoring Ireland's competitiveness and reasserting his country's international reputation. In addition to his noteworthy efforts on behalf of his own country, the Taoiseach has also demonstrated his leadership on the international stage. He is playing a key role during Ireland's presidency of the European Council in driving a program focused on stability, jobs, and growth for the collective benefit of European citizens. In recognition of these and other notable achievements, the Graduate School of Political Management awards its first Making Democracy Work Award to Taoiseach Enda Kenny, TD. Let's hear a round of applause.